Hello everybody and welcome to the second video in our series of videos on ancient Rome. In the last video we looked at the foundation of Rome, we looked at the rich people of Rome known as the patricians and where they lived in the domus. Today we are going to look at the other major group in Roman society, the plebeians or the plebs. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes, so by the end of this presentation you guys should know what a plebeian is and where they lived. You guys should know 2 facts about life in the houses of the plebeians, and finally you guys should know what an aqueduct and the Grain Dole were. The plebeians, they were free Roman citizens, so that means they weren't born into slavery, but they had less rights than the patricians. The Roman government consisted of a senate and 2 men elected consuls. These would be in charge, and the consuls would be in charge for a year. However, you could only be a senator or somebody who was elected to a senate if you were a patrician. And you could only become a consul if you were a patrician also. And on top of that, you could only vote if you were a patrician. So plebes were the completely left out of this aspect of Roman life. However, over the course of 200 years, from around 494 BCE to 287 BCE, the plebes went on a series of 5 different strikes. They went on 5 different strikes over this long period of time. So what did a strike look like? The plebes would abandon the city, which meant that all the shops and workshops would be shut down. Remember, the plebes are the vast majority of the population. So if they walk out, nothing in the city really runs. These secessions or strikes led to the plebeians getting more rights. For example, they got to elect a special official called the tribune. So he was a politician who was elected by them, who was there to protect their rights. And they also, the plebeians, they also went on strike to ensure that their ability to vote for this tribune wasn't violated. So what was life like for the plebes? Well, the plebes made up the vast majority of the population. So how they lived differed widely, as there were some very rich plebeians and there were some very poor plebeians. But generally, their lives were like this. They lived in a building called an Insulae. These were apartment blocks. They were 5 or 6 stories tall. The rooms at the bottom were rented as shops, where things like clothes, bread, and footwear could be sold. They also had a shop called a Thermopolia, which was like a takeaway. The Romans who lived in insulas, they weren't able to cook in their house as the risk of fire was too great. So if they wanted hot food for dinner, they had to get it from the Thermopolia. The better off plebeian families, they lived on the lower floors, which would contain several rooms, some nice furniture, whereas the poorer plebeians would live on the upper floors. Um, it was cheaper to rent these higher floors because there was always a danger of fire, which was common enough in Rome, and you would have less chance of surviving if you lived higher up. There was no fire escapes at the time. So this up here is where the poor plebeians would have lived. These insulas, they had no toilets, so all of the people used public toilets. They had no waste disposal, so rubbish was just thrown out the window. And they also had no running water, so they would go to a public fountain to collect their water and to bring it home. The water was brought to the fountains by these examples of magnificent Roman engineering in the aqueducts. So these aqueducts, the water would flow down from a water source into these public fountains. The food that the plebeians ate was very basic. They would usually have like bread or biscuits for breakfast and lunch, or they might have a type of porridge, usually made from either wheat or barley. There was also massive poverty and unemployment in the city of Rome. And when Rome became an empire, which we'll look at later on when Augustus takes over, um, it wasn't uncommon for the emperors to give out a free supply of grain to the poorest people every month just to keep them happy. This was called the Grain Dole or simply the Dole. And sometimes it could be given to as many as 200,000 people, 200,000 poor people in need of it every month. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So you guys should now know what a plebeian was. So these were the poor people of Rome who didn't belong to the patrician class. You should know that they lived in an insula. You should know a few facts about the insula, such as the richer people lived on the lower floors, poor people lived on the higher floors. There was no toilets in the insula. They got their food from a Thermopolia. Fire was a great hazard back then, and there was no waste disposal, so rubbish was thrown at the windows. Then you should also know what an aqueduct was. So that is the um, structure we saw that transported water from like a river or a water source all the way down into public fountains where people could go and get their water. And finally, you guys should know what a grain dole was, which was the free grain that was given out to the poorest members of Roman society. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys got something interesting from this video.